perspective, we have to realize that we can never know somebody's culture completely. We can never know what they took from their culture, what they didn't take from their culture, particularly if they're American. And perhaps they're up in Cal State East Bay. We have a lot of children of immigrants, and some things they. Do you have a big box on your screen by the thing that says through a DUI lens? Is there a big gray box?
It looks pretty good from
Okay. Okay. Sometimes when I do screen sharing, if I have a box there and the chat box popped up, you get a big gray box, but you don't, so that's great. Anyway, so the thing with it's really important not to stereotype, I guess, is the main thing that I'm saying. It's important to understand that lots of people approach conflict and anger and all kinds of emotions different ways, and it's not necessarily going to fit with what you think their culture does. So I'm uncomfortable giving, like, here's how this culture manages. I didn't mean to do that. Here's how this culture manages conflict. I don't think that's really helpful. But what we can do is, most of us have grown up in America. We can kind of look at it from an American perspective. What does American people think? What do American people think and are socialized around culture, around conflict, and realize that not everybody in the world is the same way. So if we look at what the considerations are, is that one of the things when you're looking at DEI and multicultural work is the biggest takeaway is that we often assume white American values are the norm without really questioning it. We don't know what is generalized to the entire population. Really, very few things are. But we kind of assume our way is the norm. And when we're looking at it through a DEI lens, we have to question everything. And you have to start questioning everything. And it's honestly, it's not that hard to question everything, because it's often put in our faces that we are assuming that something is the norm when it isn't. I talked a little bit about cultural competence versus cultural humility. Also, misunderstandings happen in any conflict, cultural difference or not. So if I have a conflict with Sharon, that's not going to be that different than if I have a conflict with somebody from a different culture. Sharon and I may speak the same language. We may get to an understanding more quickly. And it may take a little longer for the person of another culture. But we both kind of have to question our norms, even though we're both white American women. Does that make sense? Okay. So familial differences are bigger than cultural differences. That's an important part that we look at in therapy. The way someone learned to deal with conflict, often in their family, often informs how they deal with it as a adult. And also, I wanted to say, if you want to raise your hand, if you do the little raise hand thing at the bottom, you'll come to the top of my bar and I'll see it. But if you go like this, I may not be able to see you because I can't see all of you. Okay. So when we talk about conflict, there's lots of different styles of how we show our anger to people. You see up in the upper left hand people, you've got two guys going at it together, kind of matching each other's energy. In the upper right hand, you've got a woman coming forward that seems kind of maybe aggressive, forthright, direct, probably, we imagine. And then the guy to the right is backing off. And then the woman in the bottom picture, she's obviously not saying anything. She's being quiet, but we can tell from her body language that she's having probably similar feelings as the two people above her, right? She's just expressing it really differently. And I'm sure we've all known people like that. We've probably been people like that. So when you think about addressing a conflict or addressing a misunderstanding, how you come at it is super important. So we have, a lion here. If you come at it from a directive, harsh, angry point of view, and if all you're aware of is your anger, if you haven't thought about what feelings are underneath your anger, you're going to come at it like this, and probably a productive conversation is not really going to happen. And what is going to happen with this scenario? Probably you're either going to shrink back and run, or you're going to fight back, right? You have to defend yourself. So this is what might happen, and that's not going to solve anything, right? So then we have that's that they come back together. It's very sweet. Another thing that's really important about conflict, no matter what the culture is to realize that we're all looking at different pieces of the conflict. We're all looking at different pieces of the situation. This is the famous, what if you had visually impaired people touching an elephant? And one person feels the side and says, well, this is a brick wall. It feels like a wall. It's really hard. Another person feels the leg and says, no, it feels like a tree trunk. The person at the end of it feels the tail and says, this is a rope. I don't know what you guys are talking about. So it's just really important to remember that when we're talking about a situation, we rarely have all the pieces. So it's important when you're going into a conflict not to assume you understand all of it, not to assume you have the answer, and not to assume you know what the other person's point of view is. You can guess, but it's important to realize what information does this person have that I don't have? And that's a way to kind of bridge that gap there. So when we're talking about cultural differences in conflict, I think there's two concepts that come up most in most of the literature. And what's interesting is most of the literature, the research is done in industrial organizational psychology. So it's done in business. So businesses have really had an incentive to understand other cultures so that they can negotiate and do sales. And so most of the literature out there about conflict resolution and negotiation has to do with businesses and negotiating contracts, which I thought was interesting. So there's a lot of it on like East Asian companies, very little on other countries that we might not be as economically invested in. So that's kind of interesting. But one of the main things we think about when we think about cultures that are different than ours is, are they collectivist or individualist? So generally, American culture is seen as individualist. And we're very much, capitalism itself is individualist, right? The group's needs are secondary to the individual need. That individuals need to take care of themselves. They need to figure out what they need, what will work for them. They need to make that happen for themselves. The group can take care of itself, but I need to do what's right for me. And nobody's going to tell me what's right for me, right? I'm the only one that can answer that. Collectivist is a really different kind of way of looking at it. The individual needs are secondary to the group's needs. So one of the issues that college students have very often is that they're coming from a collectivist culture. Their parents came from a collectivist nation like India, perhaps. And they're growing up in America where individualistic values are all around them. And how do they balance that out? It's very, very hard. It's very hard to think about, what am I going to take? What am I going to honor from my family? What do I want to take? And what am I going to honor from the culture I'm growing up in? And it's because my point of view as a therapist is like, you get to decide how to do this. Then I can't tell you. No one can tell you. Your family's telling you one thing, but there are other possibilities. There's other options. But before I had this lens, I was much more like, no, you have to do what you need to do. You have to what do you want to do with your life? And what are your goals? What are your dreams? You need to, we always thought that developmentally, individuation was the goal, right? And in Jungian therapy, individuation is like enlightenment. And so with a collectivist culture, that's really different. One of the things that I think about when I think about collectivist cultures is Costco. I don't know how often you guys have shopped at Costco, but now that I work full time, I have to go on the weekends, and it's so there are whole families in Costco, right? They bring everybody. And that used to really bug me, because I am good at Costcoing. I am so good at Costcoing. I get in, I know where everything is. I have my cart. I'm going around people. I never block anything. I know exactly where everybody else is around me. It's like a freeway. I try really hard not to block anybody or cut anybody off. I am good at Costcoing, right? So I take some pride in this. And I would get really kind of annoyed because these families were not good at Costcoing the way I was. They were not. They would stop in the middle of the aisle. They would just wander here, there. They'd have to go find grandma, bring her back. And it drove me nuts. And then I realized I am thinking absolutely my way is the way to do it. 100%. Whereas they're thinking, what is your problem, lady? Chill, relax. It's just, we're just grocery shopping. So you always kind of have to look at how am I looking at this particular situation? Am I looking at it from an individualist perspective? Am I looking at it? Is there a different way to look at it? Am I assuming that my way is best? That's a really kind of a simple example, but I think we do this a lot in America. And I know we used to do it even more. Where the whole there, right? There's 3 ways to spell there. And if you do it wrong, somebody's going to come up in your comments and say you spelled it wrong. Some people have a hard time with letters. Some people have dyslexia, and sometimes people have a hard time figuring it out. Do we get the meaning of the post? Yeah, I think we could get the meaning of the post. And so that kind of thing, we just really have to question ourselves all the time when the energy starts going up, like they're not doing it the right way. They're so irresponsible, or I don't know, there's other things that could come up. We really need to take a step back and say, okay, am I looking at this from my American individualistic point of view? And I think that's, in terms of cultural awareness, I think that is the main thing that we can do in terms of cultural humility. Realize that our ways are not the norm. Our ways are as informed by our culture as anyone else's. The other piece, besides collectivism versus individualism, is who has the power. So it's really important to think when you're looking at a conflict, you're looking at who's involved in a conflict, who has the power in the society, because that's absolutely going to inform how the other person comes to you. If you're a white American and if you're male, they're going to come to you differently if they're female, probably. That's going to inform it. So it's really important to understand where you stand, how your identities are influencing how you're looking at it, as well as the person who you're dealing with. Okay, let's see. I have a quote: diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. Because what we want ultimately is belonging, right? And we want people to feel that they belong with us. So the more that we can recognize our own values, our own cultural norms, and realize, hey, you may not do it that way. Tell me how you do it. There's a humility of, I think I understand some things about your culture, but I may not. And I don't really know you very well. So how do you do it? It's really important to be humble with that and not assume you know. So in terms of how Americans handle conflict, most of us are American. They tend to be more direct. They like to get the issue out in the open. But for example, talking around the issue, and I am so much like this. I really recognize that I am very individualistic. I want to get to the point. I want to get to the bottom layer. I want to get to what's really happening, what's actually happening. I want it to be direct. I want you to come to me and not bring in a third party. But East Asian cultures, for example, see directiveness as immature and unnecessarily provocative. And they will often bring in third parties. That's actually a sign of respect. It's not a sign of avoidance. It's a sign of respect, which is interesting because I think in American culture, we would think that was triangulation. But they do it differently. So also American tends to be more, well, if someone's going to win this conflict, either I'm going to win and you're going to lose, or you're going to win and I'm going to lose. Whereas we all try, we've heard of win-win, try to get a win-win. But I think in American capitalist culture, generally, if there's a winner, then there's a loser. Okay, so but these 2 slides are something that I took from a book. Said if you're more familiar with Western culture, realize that the person you're dealing with may be telling you something indirectly. If you think it's a story and they're kind of wasting your time with the story or a metaphor, whatever, realize, oh, I wonder what the message is. And I should put a little more effort into that. I can tend to be like, if they don't say it to me directly, like if they don't say it straight out, how am I going to know? Right. I want people to be really straight with me and straightforward and honest. But it's very important for me to step back and say, okay, I might need to put a little of work into interpreting this and figuring it out and then checking it out. Looking for non-committal. It's very unusual sometimes for some cultures to say yes and no. I was a Cub Scout leader for many years, and this little boy who was in my pack stopped coming. And I was semi friends with his mom. We were friendly when we saw each other, but she would never answer me if he was coming or not. And I'm like, I think he dropped out, but she won't tell me if he dropped out. So every week I would get together my little arrows that I'm putting together for them and my little turtles carved out of soap. And I would have one for him just in case he showed up because I didn't know. Finally, I finally kind of cornered and I said, please just tell me, is Vince coming back? And she looked really kind of ashamed. She said, no, he has piano lessons at the same time. And I'm like, that's great. That's fabulous. I just need to know so that I don't prepare something for him all the time. But she wasn't going to tell me that he dropped out until I finally asked for the actual answer. There's like that might be hard to do. That might be kind of difficult. That actually could mean no, but we take it as non-committal. So just be kind of aware of that. And the next slide is interesting because it's for the point of view from people with the East. It's kind of coaching them like your American counterparts, your Western counterparts are going to be more direct. Please try not to take it personally. Try not to take it as an insult. They don't mean anything personally by it. They're just more direct and they want to get to the answer quickly. If you don't think you understand, go ahead and ask follow-up questions. They are usually okay with that. Recognize that bringing in third parties can be offensive to Western people, feel like triangulation. Okay, so I have more, but I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop there. Okay, so I did go over a little bit, didn't I? So I want to kind of enter it, just put it out there for you guys. When you think about either conflict or in terms of cross-cultural communication, what kinds of questions come up for you, particularly if you're trying to offer support?
Yeah, I honestly think that you got it, Colleen, in your presentation, because I do have this need to be very direct, and I just have no clue how to operate when people are not comfortable with that. So I don't even know where to go from there.
Sure. One of the things that I had to learn as a therapist was how to not make eye contact, not to judge the client for not making eye contact if they didn't want to, how to sit with something without coming in and reflecting on it necessarily. You learn to read their cues. And if something kind of shuts them down, okay, that was the wrong thing. Let's take another turn. You look for clues that they're shutting down instead of opening up. So that's something you can do in conversation when you're offering encouragement to people, is look for clues that they're shutting down in response to what you're doing, as opposed to opening up and, trusting you.
Well, I grew up extraordinarily conflict avoidant, and I still feel wary of conflict almost all the time. My strategies have changed a lot, though. I used to insist on being right as a way to kind of go through conflict and just figure out who's right, and it was usually me.
Yeah.
Or I insisted that it was me, even if it wasn't true. But that has shifted, and I've gone through a couple other strategies. But my current strategy, I'm not completely happy with, in the sense that, especially for multicultural conflict, I would like to know more about other cultures than I actually do know. So feeling like I don't always know tends to make me deferential and tends to mean that I just let it play out a little bit more than explore. And oftentimes that doesn't really convey that I'm concerned or that I care about people. That's most, if everybody else is white, I tend to have a little bit of an easier time because I can make more assumptions. But in multicultural conflict, I tend to retreat and defer a lot more.
I think that's really common. I think particularly for those of us who are avoidant, our go-to style is to avoid it. So if there's any messiness, if there's any chance of cultural misunderstandings, I don't need to address the conflict that badly. I'll just sit over here. Or I'll watch and wait for you to like bring it up with me.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Jim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I hope I can form this as a question. When you said in the beginning, cultural competence and cultural humility, that took me back to, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years, but Alex Capitan did a transgender 101 class. And he said, I ask you, and I was really nervous about it. I was the leader of it, but he said, all I ask of you is that you bring an attitude of curiosity and wonder. And that moved me into the humility, but it also moved me into not having to be defensive or to be right or wrong. And it really opened me up and opened up into these areas as well. But I can see that, like and you opened up saying, I'm not going to present what it's like in different cultures, but that also makes it where you ask, and ask for people how they respond. But if you're in the conflict, how do you engage with that humility, I guess, and because, yeah, I know how to not know how to do it. I would like to have that sense of how do you move with that? Because the tendency is to go, okay, well, tell me about it, but that's a direct move. So anyway, you hear where I'm going with it. But I think that the attitude of humility, what you bring, moves into the space of, I'm not the expert and I don't know. And so I better listen and just try to move with these broader understandings that you're giving us, but that we don't have to worry about being exactly on, because we have some instincts around it too. Because like you say, individual differences are, family differences are greater than cultural differences, those kinds of things. It's like assuring us that we know, but we don't have to be right, but we need to move with humility. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's kind of an aikido there that's involved. I wonder if you could say a little more about.
Well, I think you said it really well right there. That kind of is exactly the stance. And when you consider power as well in the dynamic,
yeah.
If I'm at a meeting with someone who is of a more marginalized population, I need to understand that, and I need to know that they may be reluctant. They may to make some assumptions about whether or not I'm willing to listen to them. They may make some assumptions about whether or not they'll be heard or understood at all. And it's up to me to be the listener, really, even if I think I'm right, to be the listener, to make space for them, to create the space for them to say, and then for me to be curious about, okay, I see how I'm coming at this. I see which part of the elephant that I'm at. And, if they're reluctant to share, I can say, I am at the tail and it feels like a rope to me. And this is how I see it. But I understand that that's not the only way to see it.
So you open up the space by acknowledging what your bias is. sort of.
Absolutely. Yes. One of the things
Yeah,
we
that's
do
great.
when we
Yeah.
when we open up a therapy session or a therapy group is talk about our own individual identities that we're bringing into the room.
Right, right.
And that's important for us to acknowledge first so that they know that they can also acknowledge that I know we're not on the same page. I know that we don't live the same life. And I'm already acknowledging that. And I want to hear it from you. That's why it's so important for me to hear your experience and to be curious about your experience and not assume that I know what it is.
And that changes the power dynamic at the same time.
Hopefully, yeah.
Well, I mean, it shifts like me as white male, I need to shut up right now, I mean, but it's, thank you. That's
Yeah.
really neat.
It makes sense.
So we probably have time for maybe one more question or comment.
Yeah, I would like to have more time to talk about this because it's one of the things that's most interesting to me, and somehow has many threads which have run through my life, both in feeling a sense of discontent with the individualism of the culture that I grew up in, and then also kind of like trying to leave it or really leaving it, depending on how you look at it, by marrying someone who is from another culture and from a very collectivist culture, and then learning kind of like how that really worked, in terms of, almost as if you ended up in analysis with someone and it went on for your whole life. And so I think, what we're doing here is we're trying to put aside our American individualism and become more collective. And in doing so, we're becoming more like, say, the way the Japanese people are linguistically, where we have many different honorific levels that we're trying to be sensitive to, but we're starting from scratch because American culture is like so all pervasive, and it's so very difficult to really get like a feeling, and there's so many cultures, and even within those cultures, as we're talking about, there's so many different ways of communicating about conflict, and anthropology, of course, has even struggled to kind of figure out if it has a standpoint to say anything about this that is, understanding and useful. So I think that just trying moves us in the right direction. And the more that we communicate with people who are different of all kinds, and there are many different kinds of differences, the more sensitive we become. And that on the other side, there are also transformative events that can happen. Like a lot of people have said to me, I really came to America because I love this individualism. I stood in front of the mirror and practiced English 12 hours a day so that I already knew how to computer program so that I could get a job because I love American individualism. So I think, that we just have to try as a culture, and everything else comes naturally. So I don't know, that's my perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think I might move us on back to our agenda, if that's all right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Colleen. That was very interesting.